"Get out of the truck now." "Officer, what did I do?" "Big, black, and driving somewhere you don't belong. That's what you did." Elias Bannon stepped out with his hands already raised, palms open, fingers spread, the universal signal of a man who has nothing to hide and everything to lose. "I'm a decorated United States Marine, sir." "A Marine?" The deputy laughed, and 3 other porch lights flicked on down the block, curtains twitching, phones rising. "All I see out here is a stray that slipped its leash." He grabbed Elias by the collar and kicked his feet apart against the cold hood of his own truck. Neighbors watched from behind glass. Not one of them opened a door. Not one of them said a word. What Deputy Wade Corrigan could not have known, what he was about to learn, in the worst way a man can learn anything, was that the stray bleeding pride into the hood of that truck would have a 4-star general standing at rigid attention, saluting him, before the night was finished. To understand how far this would fall, you have to go back. You have to understand who Elias Bannon really was. He grew up in Millbrook Falls, Tennessee, a town so small the water tower had everyone's initials carved into it going back 3 generations. His mother, Loretta Bannon, worked the lunch line at Millbrook Falls Elementary for 26 years. Hairnet on before the sun came up, home after it went down, 3 boys raised on a cafeteria aide's paycheck and a spine made of iron. She never asked anyone for a dime she hadn't earned first. Elias was the middle son, the quiet one. His older brother ran with the wrong crowd. His younger brother ran after girls. Elias ran toward discipline, like it was the only thing in the world that made sense to him. The day he turned 18, he walked into a recruiter's office and signed before he let himself think twice. Loretta cried the whole drive to the bus station. She packed him a lunch like he was still a boy heading to 3rd grade, a ham sandwich, an apple, a paper napkin, with "I'm proud of you," baby written in her looping cursive. He carried that napkin, folded into a small worn square, in his wallet for 13 years. Boot camp broke plenty of young men. It sharpened Elias into something else entirely. By 23, he'd deployed twice, once to Iraq, once to a forgotten valley in Afghanistan. But it was his 3rd deployment, to Kandahar province, that carved his name into history. The temperature that August day was somewhere past furnace. His squad was moving through a narrow wadi when the first shot cracked off the rock face. Then a second. Then the whole ridge came alive with muzzle flashes. Corporal Danny Ruiz took a round clean through the thigh. PFC. Sam Wexler caught shrapnel across his back and went down screaming into the dirt, pinned in open ground with fire pouring in from 3 directions. Every man in that unit did the math in half a second. Going out there meant dying. Elias went anyway. He sprinted across 400 meters of exposed ground, with rounds kicking up dust at his heels, hauled Ruiz, 220 pounds of dead weight, behind a crumbling wall. Then he went back through the same storm of fire and dragged Wexler out too. And then, while his squad laid down what little suppressive fire they had left, Elias flanked the ridgeline alone and, in the words of his commanding officer, did something in 11 minutes that most men couldn't do in 11 lifetimes. For that, Staff Sergeant Elias Bannon received the Medal of Honor at a ceremony in the East Room of the White House. Loretta stood in the front row, sobbing into the same hands that once packed him a paper bag lunch. The man who pinned the pale blue ribbon around his neck was Lieutenant General Harold Ashworth, Commanding General of Marine Forces Command. After the ceremony, Ashworth pulled him aside, gripped his shoulder, and said 5 words Elias never let go of. "You are the best of us." From that day forward, Ashworth wasn't just a commanding officer on a letterhead. He was something closer to a father, a phone call on every birthday, a handwritten letter after every milestone, the kind of bond that only exists between 2 men, one of whom watched the other run into certain death and come back breathing. Elias served 3 more years, then retired. Not because the Corps wore him down, but because something else was pulling at him. The kids back home. Kids growing up exactly the way he had, with no father in the house and a world that had already decided what they'd amount to before they'd had a single chance to prove otherwise. So he started volunteering. Tuesdays and Thursdays, at the Millbrook Falls Community Center, he stood in front of a room of teenagers and taught them the only two things he trusted completely: discipline and the belief that they were worth more than anyone had ever told them. That Friday evening, he'd just wrapped a session. He'd brought his medal to show the kids. It sat now in its small black case, tucked into the glove box, and he was driving home the long way, cutting through Kensington Hills to dodge the construction backing up Route 9. Windows up, headlights on, radio low, speed exactly 35. And then the red and blue lights bloomed in his mirror. Rewind for a moment. Because to understand how a routine stop turned into a house fire, you have to see both sides of that windshield. Deputy Wade Corrigan had worn a badge in Ashcombe County for 15 years. 42 years old, a buzz cut that hadn't changed since the academy, a jaw permanently set like he was expecting an argument. To the residents of Kensington Hills, he was a hero. The deputy who rolled through twice a shift, who waved at the widows on their porches, who made people feel safe simply by existing in a cruiser at the end of their street. To internal affairs, he was something else. 4 excessive force complaints in 6 years. Every one of them dismissed without so much as an outside review. A pattern anyone paying attention should have caught, except Sheriff Dale Pruitt didn't care to look. Pruitt believed in exactly one currency: numbers, and Corrigan produced numbers. What those numbers never showed was the method behind them. Corrigan called it instinct. Other people, quieter people, had another word for it. He'd cruise the wealthier subdivisions after dark, and more often than not, what caught his eye wasn't a broken taillight. It was a black or Latino face somewhere he'd decided it didn't belong. He never wrote that down. On paper, it was always a lane violation. A vehicle matching a description that never actually existed. Kensington Hills had seen a string of garage break-ins over the past 2 weeks, and the neighborhood social media group was on fire with hysteria. Sheriff Pruitt told Corrigan to increase patrols. So when Corrigan spotted a black Chevy pickup rolling in from the south entrance at dusk, driven by a black man in a gray hoodie, his hand was on the radio before his brain finished the sentence. Got eyes on a suspicious vehicle. Black male, dark pickup, entering Kensington Hills from the South Road. Light him up. On the other end of that radio sat Deputy Trevor Nash, 26, 2 years on the job, still trying to look like he belonged in the uniform. Nash had ridden with Corrigan for 5 months, and in that time he'd absorbed exactly one unwritten rule: don't question Wade. Elias saw the lights and didn't panic, didn't speed up. He did exactly what 14 years of training had carved into his bones. He controlled the one thing he could control, which was himself. Pulled to the shoulder, cut the engine, flicked on the dome light so the officer could see clean into the cab, both hands at 10 and 2, and waited, heart rate steady as a metronome. He had survived ambushes in Kandahar. A traffic stop in Tennessee was not going to rattle him. Corrigan approached from the driver's side, hand already resting on his holster before a single word had been exchanged. He didn't identify himself, didn't state a reason for the stop. He simply raised his flashlight and drove the beam directly into Elias's eyes, holding it there like a blade. License and registration, no greeting, no explanation, just a command. Yes, officer. I'm going to reach into my back pocket for my wallet, slowly. You'd better. Elias handed the documents through the window. Corrigan studied the license like it was a forged bill, turning it over, holding it up to the light, searching for something that wasn't there. Everything was clean. No warrants, no priors. Registration matched the plate, matched the truck. There was nothing here, nothing at all, for any reasonable officer to hold on to. Corrigan held on to it anyway. Elias Bannon. He said the name like it was a punchline. What are you doing all the way out here, Elias? Cutting through, officer. Avoiding the construction on Route 9. Cutting through. Corrigan leaned into the window frame, close enough that Elias could smell coffee and chewing tobacco on his breath. Through Kensington Hills. After dark. In a hoodie. There was nothing to say to that, and responding would only make it worse, so Elias said nothing. Corrigan radioed dispatch to run the plates. The answer came back clean in under a minute. He stared at the radio like it had personally betrayed him. Deputy Nash leaned in at the passenger window.
Plates are clean, Wade. Registration matches. We're good here, right?
Corrigan didn't look at him. No, we are not good. He straightened up, adjusted his belt, and said the words that would turn a bad stop into a national headline. Step out of the vehicle. May I ask why, officer? My documents are in order. I haven't broken any law. You're part of an active investigation. Step out.
Now, what investigation?
Corrigan leaned in close enough that his breath fogged the cold glass. You want to lawyer up on me, boy?
Get out.
Elias took one slow breath through his nose, out through his mouth. The same trick he'd once used crouched in a foxhole, while mortar rounds walked closer and closer through the dark. He opened the door, stepped out, hands visible the entire time. The evening air was sharp. Somewhere down the block a dog barked once and went silent, as if even the animals knew to stay out of it. The red and blue light washed across manicured lawns, like something spilled and never cleaned up. Hands on the hood. Spread your feet. Elias complied. The metal was still warm under his palms. A silver sedan rolled by slow enough for the woman in the passenger seat to crane her neck and stare. The driver never turned his head. Corrigan waved them through without breaking eye contact with Elias. Nothing to see here, folks. Routine stop. Routine. The word hung in the October air while Elias Bannon, Medal of Honor recipient, decorated combat veteran, mentor to 60 children who looked up to him like he'd hung the moon, stood spread eagle against his own truck for the crime of existing somewhere he wasn't wanted. Behind him, Nash shifted his weight, opened his mouth like he had something to say, and closed it again. And that swallowed sentence was only the beginning. What happened over the next several minutes felt, to Elias, like it stretched into its own separate hour. Corrigan circled behind him slowly, boots crunching gravel, taking his time the way a man does when he knows exactly how much power he's holding and wants you to feel every ounce of it. Here's what I think, Corrigan said, almost pleasant, which was the ugliest part of all. I think you're not cutting through anything. I think you're casing this street. We've did break-ins for 2 weeks straight, and now here you come. Big guy. Dark truck. After dark. Hoodie. I'm driving home from the community center. I mentor kids there. You mentor kids. Corrigan repeated it like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. Teaching them how to case a garage. Elias stared at the reflection of the flashing lights rippling across the hood and said nothing. He focused on his breathing. Steady. Controlled. I'm searching your vehicle. On what grounds, officer? I smell marijuana. There it was. The oldest key in the box. 3 words that could unlock a man's entire life without a warrant. Without evidence, without anything but one officer's word thrown against another man's silence. There is no marijuana in my truck. I don't use drugs, never have. Well, my nose disagrees, and last I checked, my nose wears a badge. Corrigan tore into the cab, like a man on a mission that had nothing to do with finding anything. He wasn't careful. He wasn't systematic. He was making a mess because the mess was the point. He yanked Elias's gym bag from behind the seat and hurled it into the road. The zipper burst, a towel and a water bottle skidding across the asphalt. He stepped on the shirt on his way past it. He grabbed a stack of worksheets from the youth program off the back seat and flung them out the door where they caught the wind and scattered across the neighbor's lawn like trash. Nash stood beside Elias in silence, flashlight aimed at the ground, unable to meet his eyes. Finally, quietly, "Marine, huh? What unit?" "3rd, 4th Marines. How many deployments?" "4. 2 Iraq, 2 Afghanistan." Nash's jaw worked like he wanted to say something bigger than small talk, but the words wouldn't come. Inside the truck, Corrigan reached the glove box. He pulled out the manual, a tire gauge, and then a small black case, heavier than its size suggested. He popped it open. Resting on dark blue velvet was a 5-pointed gold star hanging from a pale blue ribbon dotted with 13 white stars, the Medal of Honor. Fewer than 3,500 Americans in the entire history of the nation have ever worn it. Corrigan had no idea what he was holding. "What in the hell is this?" Elias turned his head and saw the case in Corrigan's fist, and for the first time all night, something shifted behind his eyes. Not rage. Something colder and deeper, the place where a man keeps the things he'd die to protect. "That is the Medal of Honor, Deputy. Presented to me by the President of the United States." Corrigan looked at it, looked at Elias, and laughed out loud. "The President? Right." He held it up toward Nash. "Hey, our boy here says the President gave him a little necklace." Nash took one look and went pale, because unlike Corrigan, he recognized it. He'd seen one behind glass at a military museum on a school trip when he was 11, and he remembered the guide saying you could count the living recipients on your fingers. "Wade," his voice cracked. "Wade, I think that's real."
Real?
Corrigan snapped the case shut and tossed it back into the glove box, where it bounced off the frame and fell to the floorboard. "This is some gang medallion. Worth about $50 at a pawn shop." Elias closed his eyes, the same metal his mother had touched with trembling fingers. The same metal that stood for 2 men dragged out of gunfire, and a ridge cleared alone under fire, tossed onto a truck floor like garbage. Corrigan got back in his face, close enough to count the veins in his eyes. "Here's what I think. I think you stole this truck. I think you're casing this street, and I think that metal is as fake as your little war story. I'd like to speak to your supervisor. You're looking at him. I'm senior officer tonight, so whatever you think is coming to save you, it's not." He grabbed Elias's arm, twisted it up his back, and shoved him harder into the hood. Elias's cheek hit the cold metal. "Stop resisting." He wasn't resisting. His arms were limp. His legs hadn't moved an inch. There was no resistance anywhere in his body, but Corrigan needed that word for the report he was already composing in his head. "Wade." Nash stepped forward, voice shaking. "He's not resisting. He's not doing anything. Cuff him, Nash." Nash froze. "I said cuff him. Now." His hands trembled as he clicked the cuffs around Elias's wrists, cold steel against warm skin. Elias met his eyes and said nothing. No pleading, no arguing, just the stillness of a man who has already faced real death and knows this isn't it. Corrigan marched him to the cruiser, shoved his head down, slammed the door. Through the glass, Elias watched his belongings scattered across the road. The gym bag in the dirt, the worksheets from his kid's program, blowing gently down the block, into someone's flower bed. He looked down at the cuffs on wrists that had once dragged 2 wounded men across 400 meters of open fire. Now, they were locked in the back of a cruiser, in his own country, for a crime that did not exist. Corrigan leaned against the hood and started writing up the charges: resisting arrest, suspicious activity, possession of a suspected stolen item. All of it invented, every single word. But the worst night of Wade Corrigan's life hadn't even started yet, because Elias Bannon still had 1 phone call left, and the number he was about to dial was going to arrive at that station wearing 4 silver stars. At the Ashcombe County Sheriff's Office, Elias sat on a metal bench in a holding cell, wrists raw and red, fluorescent light humming overhead like a mosquito that never landed. A deputy he didn't recognize slid a phone across the counter. 1 call. He didn't dial a lawyer. He didn't dial his mother. He scrolled to a single word saved in his contacts: General, It rang twice. Bannon. The voice on the other end was deep, unhurried. The voice of a man who had commanded thousands across 4 decades and never once needed to raise it. "Sir, I'm at the Ashcombe County Sheriff's Office. I've been arrested." 3 full seconds of silence. Anyone who knew Harold Ashworth well enough understood that his silences carried more weight than most men's shouting. "Arrested for what?" "Driving through a neighborhood, sir. They searched my truck without cause, found the medal, called it a gang medallion, charged with resisting and suspicious activity." Neither happened. Another silence, longer this time. Elias could hear him breathing, slow, deliberate, the way a man breathes when he's containing something enormous. "Don't say another word to anyone. Not one word. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Lieutenant General Harold Ashworth, 4 stars, commanding general of Marine Forces Command, had been at a veterans fundraiser 2 counties over that same evening and was already in the car heading home when the call came through. Ashcombe County sat barely 40 minutes away. He told his driver to turn the car around. Back at the station, time moved like cold syrup. Elias sat in silence, hands on his knees, asking for nothing. The deputies at the front desk kept glancing his way like they'd caught something they couldn't quite place. Corrigan sat at his desk, relaxed, cracking a joke to another deputy about the Marine he'd hauled in with the fake war medal. Probably bought off some website. The other deputy laughed. Nash, 3 desks over, did not. 40 minutes later, headlights swept the front windows. A black government SUV pulled into the lot, followed by a second vehicle. Both doors opened at once. Lieutenant General Harold Ashworth stepped out in full dress uniform. Dark blue jacket, 4 silver stars gleaming on each shoulder, a chest of ribbons representing 41 years of service to a country he'd nearly died for twice. 2 aides flanked him in perfect step behind. He pushed through the station doors like the building belonged to him. Glass rattled in the frame. The young deputy at the front desk shot up so fast. Her chair slammed the wall and her coffee went sliding off the desk. Every head turned. Corrigan's pen slipped from his fingers and rolled off the desk. He didn't reach for it. One aide stepped forward and presented credentials. "Lieutenant General Harold Ashworth, United States Marine Corps. You are holding one of my Marines. Bring him out now." The desk sergeant didn't argue, didn't ask for paperwork, didn't verify a thing. He nearly ran to the holding cell. Elias was brought out 30 seconds later, still cuffed. Ashworth stopped walking. His eyes dropped to the red marks pressed into Elias's wrists, and a vein pulsed once at his temple. Then he looked up at Elias's face, chin level, shoulders square, carrying himself, even in chains, like exactly what he was. And then it happened. Lieutenant General Harold Ashworth drew himself to full height and raised his right hand to his brow. He saluted Elias Bannon first. For anyone who doesn't know military tradition, this simply does not happen. Rank flows upward. Privates salute generals. Generals do not salute staff sergeants. Except for one sacred exception written into the oldest customs of the service. Every member of the armed forces, regardless of rank, salutes a Medal of Honor recipient first. Generals have done it for privates. Admirals have done it for corporals. It has nothing to do with rank and everything to do with honor. And in that fluorescent lit station in Ashcombe County, a 4-star general was saluting a man standing in handcuffs. The room went dead silent, not quiet, silent. The kind that falls when every person in a room understands, in the same instant, that something has gone catastrophically wrong. Corrigan's face drained of color. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Ashworth held the salute for 3 full seconds, lowered his hand, and turned. Who is responsible for this? It wasn't a question. Corrigan had no choice but to step forward. "Sir, I conducted a routine stop based on—" "I didn't ask for a speech." Ashworth's voice was quiet, which made it worse than shouting. "I asked who is responsible." I am, sir. Deputy Wade Corrigan. "But if you'd let me explain. Explain. You want to explain why a Medal of Honor recipient is standing in your station in handcuffs. There were break-ins in the neighborhood."
He matched?
Matched what description? What description was ever broadcast? What dispatch call described a black male in a black Chevy pickup? Corrigan opened his mouth and closed it, because there was no dispatch call. There had never been a description. There had only ever been a man driving somewhere he wasn't wanted, and everyone standing in that room now knew it. Ashworth turned to the desk sergeant. "I want the body camera footage. Both officers, every second now. It took 10 minutes to pull. They played it on a monitor in the back office." Ashworth, arms crossed, aides silent behind him. Corrigan standing in the corner like a man watching his own funeral broadcast live. The footage showed everything. The hand already resting on the holster before a word was spoken. The flashlight in Elias's face with no introduction, no stated reason. The words "big, black, and dangerous" caught clean on audio. The fabricated marijuana claim. The belongings thrown into the road. The medal called a gang trinket and tossed onto the truck floor. The shove into the hood. The command to stop resisting while Elias stood perfectly, completely still. When it ended, Ashworth stood in silence for 5 long seconds before he spoke again. "You called the Medal of Honor a gang medallion." Corrigan said nothing. This man carried 2 wounded Marines across 400 meters of open ground under fire. He cleared an enemy position alone. The President of the United States shook his hand. "And you put him face down on his own truck and called him a dog." I didn't know who he was." Ashworth took 1 step closer, close enough that Corrigan had to tilt his head up. "You didn't need to know who he was. You needed to follow the law. And you didn't. Not because you couldn't. Because you didn't want to." By then, Sheriff Dale Pruitt had arrived in khakis and a wrinkled polo, looking like a man who'd just been told his own house was on fire. Pruitt had run the department for 11 years on one formula: keep the numbers clean, keep complaints quiet, keep getting re-elected. Corrigan was his best producer, 4 excessive force complaints in 6 years, all buried. There was no burying this. Pruitt looked at the footage, looked at the 4 stars on Ashworth's shoulders, and made the fastest decision of his career. "Deputy Corrigan, you're suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Badge and weapon now." Corrigan's hands shook as he unclipped his badge and set it on the desk. Then his weapon. The metal clinked against the wood, like a period at the end of a sentence he never saw coming. Nash was suspended too. The footage showed his hesitation, his questioning, his recognition of the medal, but it also showed the cuffs going on regardless. All charges against Liv were dropped on the spot, erased, because they should never have existed in the first place. Elias walked out beside General Ashworth into the cool October night and stopped on the sidewalk to breathe. A real breath, the first one in hours that didn't taste like disinfectant. Ashworth put a hand on his shoulder. "You handled that with more discipline than most generals I've known." Elias was quiet a moment. "I just kept thinking about the kids at the center. What do I tell them Monday?" "You tell them the truth, and then we make sure this never happens to another one of them." Ashworth didn't go home that night. He made 3 phone calls before sunrise. 1 to the Marine Corps Inspector General, 1 to a contact at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, 1 to a military attorney who specialized in exactly this kind of case. The machinery started turning before most of Ashcombe County had poured its first cup of coffee. But it wasn't only the military moving. Someone inside that station, to this day, no one has ever confirmed who, copied the body camera footage and sent it to a reporter named Renee Castillo at the Nashville Tribune. She'd spent her whole career covering police misconduct across the state, and she recognized a story that would matter the moment it landed in her inbox. She watched it once, then twice. By the 3rd viewing, she'd already written her headline. It ran Monday morning above the fold. Medal of Honor recipient, arrested for driving through the wrong neighborhood. By afternoon, every major network in the country had the clip. All of them landed on the same 15 seconds, a deputy holding the nation's highest military honor and calling it a $50 gang trinket. That clip looped for 3 straight days. Veterans were furious. Military families were furious. People who had never once questioned how policing worked in this country watched Wade Corrigan snap that case shut and felt something crack open in their chest. By Wednesday, the Department of Justice opened a federal investigation, not just into Corrigan, into the entire department. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Investigators pulled 18 months of traffic stop records and cross-referenced them against demographics. Corrigan had conducted 206 stops in that window. 161, 78%, involved Black or Latino drivers, in a county where that population made up barely 20% of residents. It wasn't only Corrigan. All 4 prior excessive force complaints against him had been filed by Black men, and all 4 had been buried by Sheriff Pruitt without outside review. In 2 of them, complainants had been quietly pressured to withdraw. In a 3rd, the paperwork had simply gone missing. 2 other deputies had filed reports supporting Corrigan's version of events that directly contradicted their own body cameras. Both were placed on leave. The investigation ran 4 months. The indictment took 2 weeks after that. Federal marshals arrived at Wade Corrigan's house on a Tuesday morning at 6:30. While his neighbors watched through the blinds as he was led to a black SUV in the same kind of handcuffs he'd once put on Elias Bannon. The charges were serious: deprivation of civil rights under color of law, filing a false police report, unlawful search and seizure, assault. The trial lasted 9 days. His attorney argued reasonable suspicion, the break-ins, the increased patrols, the hoodie. The prosecutions dismantled it inside an hour with the footage, the dispatch logs showing no description had ever been broadcast, the traffic stop data, the buried complaints, and a pattern stretching back years that the system had chosen, every single time, to look away from. The jury deliberated 3 hours. Guilty on every count. Corrigan stood as the verdict was read. His wife sat behind him in the gallery, crying. He did not. He stared straight ahead like a man who, even now, could not quite process that consequences had finally caught up to him. The sentence came 2 weeks later. 5 years in a federal facility in Ashland, Kentucky. A lifetime ban from law enforcement anywhere in the United States. A permanent spot in a federal database that would follow him to his grave. His pension gone. His wife filed for divorce 4 months into his sentence. The badge that once made men look away from him now meant nothing at all, worse than nothing. It was in Ashland, 11 months into his sentence, that something in Wade Corrigan finally broke open the right way. A prison chaplain, who ran a weekly discussion group, asked the men to write a letter they'd never send to someone they'd wronged, saying everything they'd never had the courage to say out loud. Corrigan wrote his to Elias Bannon. He wrote it 4 times before he kept a single draft. He never mailed it. He didn't feel he'd earned the right to. But he read it aloud in that circle, voice shaking. And for the first time in 15 years of wearing a badge like armor, he said the words out loud to another human being. I decided who he was before he ever opened his mouth. That's not instinct. That's just a coward with a badge. Sheriff Dale Pruitt resigned 3 days after the verdict. His press conference lasted 4 minutes. He thanked the community, never once apologized, never once said Elias Bannon's name, and walked away from public office for good. The DOJ report named him directly, a leader who traded civil rights for clean statistics, and let a culture of racial profiling run unchecked for over a decade. He wasn't criminally charged, but a civil suit from Elias would shadow him for years to come. Deputy Trevor Nash was never criminally charged, The footage showed his hesitation, his quiet pushback, his recognition of the medal, but he was terminated all the same. In a statement released through his attorney, he said the words that newspapers across the state would quote for months. "I saw it happening. I heard every word of it, and I told myself it wasn't my place to stop it. It was exactly my place. I'll carry that for the rest of my life." Elias filed a civil rights lawsuit against Ashcombe County. It settled for $3,100,000. He kept almost none of it. A third expanded the youth program at the community center. A third built a scholarship in his mother's name. The Elias Bannon Legacy Scholarship for first-generation college students out of Millbrook Falls. The rest split between a Veterans Support Fund and a Legal Defense Fund for victims of police misconduct. 3 months after the settlement, a letter arrived on congressional letterhead. He was invited to testify before a House subcommittee on policing reform. He said yes. He sat at a long table in a wood-paneled hearing room in Washington, cameras and microphones stacked 3 deep, and beside him, full dress uniform, 4 stars catching the light, sat General Harold Ashworth. Elias spoke for several minutes with no notes, no prepared remarks, just a steady voice that had once called out orders under enemy fire, walking the room through the stop, the search, the medal called a trinket, the handcuffs, the joke cracked 20 feet away while he sat in a holding cell. Then he said the line that would be replayed more than any other from that entire day. "I didn't need a Medal of Honor to deserve basic dignity. Nobody does. But the fact that I had one, and it still wasn't enough, that should tell you everything you need to know about how far we still have to go." One congresswoman wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and didn't try to hide it. "So where is everyone now?" Elias Bannon still lives in Millbrook Falls, on the same streets his mother once walked before sunrise. But things have changed. The youth program he started in a single classroom, 2 afternoons a week, now runs across 3 counties with 62 kids enrolled last semester. He still teaches them discipline, respect, and how to stand tall when the world keeps pushing them down. But now he teaches them one more thing: their rights. Every new kid gets a small laminated card. One side lists exactly what to do during a traffic stop, hands visible, dome light on, ask for a badge number, request a supervisor. The other side reads, in bold, "You deserve to be treated with dignity. That is not a favor. That is the law." He speaks now at police academies, at high schools, at veterans' halls across the state. People always ask how he tells the story, without bitterness in his voice. His answer never changes. Anger is easy. Change is hard. I'm not interested in easy. The Elias Bannon Legacy Scholarship handed out its first 3 grants last spring. Loretta wore her best dress to the ceremony and cried through the whole thing. The same way she cried the day the president placed that medal around her son's neck. Wade Corrigan is still serving his sentence in Ashland, Kentucky. He has 3 years left. He will never wear a badge again. He will never carry a service weapon again. He will never again have the power to decide, on instinct alone, what another man is worth. That power is gone, and it is not coming back, and for the first time in his adult life, some part of him has finally understood that it never should have been his to hold in the first place. Trevor Nash left law enforcement the day he was fired and didn't fight it. He disappeared from public life for nearly a year, then resurfaced enrolled in a social work program. He graduated last spring and now works for a community policing nonprofit, training officers on de-escalation and on the simple, costly act of stepping in when a partner crosses the line. He opens every session the same way. "I was the guy who said nothing. I need you to not be that guy." Sheriff Pruitt's replacement, elected 4 months after his resignation, is Sheriff Yvonne Marsh, the first sheriff black in Ashcombe County history. On her first day, she implemented 3 changes: mandatory body camera activation with no override, an independent civilian oversight board with real subpoena power, and a zero-tolerance policy on racial profiling with automatic external review of every single complaint. General Harold Ashworth retired the following year after 41 years of service. At his retirement ceremony, standing before a room full of Marines, he said the line that has since traveled further than almost anything else from that entire story. The bravest thing I ever witnessed wasn't on a battlefield. It was a man standing in handcuffs who kept his dignity when the people sworn to protect him tried to take it from him. So here's the question I can't stop turning over, and maybe you can't either. If it were Trevor Nash, standing right there on that road, watching it happen in real time, feeling in your gut that it was wrong, would you have spoken up? Would you have stepped between your partner and that man? Or would you have done exactly what he did? Stayed quiet, followed the order, and spent the rest of your life wishing you hadn't? There's no clean answer. That's exactly why I'm asking. Drop yours in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what you think still needs to change. And if this story moved something in you, like it, share it with Elias who needs to hear it. And subscribe if you haven't, because the more people who see stories like this one, the harder it gets for anyone to look away. And looking away is how we got here in the first place.